Her 9000's Game Room.
Okay, so I want to review Halloween, the film, the classic. But I also want to talk about the canon of the series. And a theory some people have that Halloween is a sequel to Black Christmas. I suppose I need to start explaining what the term canon means. It should be easy, but it's kind of not. Canon is basically any part of anything which is supposed to fit into a larger story. It's treated as something which actually happened and can be cited as a true series of events within a film or a comic series. I guess the easiest way to explain it would be to say that all of the regular issues of Spider-Man happened and can be seen as counting as real events that happened in the life of Spider-Man, whereas any of the Marvel what-if stories happened outside of this canon. They're interesting little tales which might feature the same characters, but they're supposed to be ignored for the purpose of the bigger picture. Canon is a complex beast because what is and is not considered canon can change at almost any time. Basically, whenever the person or company holding the rights decides that canon needs to change, it will. An easy example for me to give of this is probably Star Wars. So for years and years, books and comics and such were released which were supposed to show us what happened in the Star Wars universe after the end of Return of the Jedi. Fans invested a whole bunch of time and money following all of these adventures, but then bang, Disney buys LucasArts and they own Star Wars, and pretty much the first thing they do is to tell us that all the stuff we'd purchased and read for years was no longer canon. It was basically all an alternative universe, and if we really wanted to see what happened canon-wise in the universe after Return of the Jedi, then we would have to wait for their new films and stuff. Plenty of films have toyed with canon in a whole range of ways, scrubbing out a film here or there, telling us to ignore certain parts, but arguably, no other franchise has pissed around with its canon to quite the same degree as the Halloween series of horror films. I can't even make it past the first film without having to talk about its canon, and whether it is part one of one story or part two of another, and it's only going to get more complicated with progressive videos I do after this. So I guess usually the first place to start would be the original. In this case, the 1979 slasher movie Halloween. Sounds simple, right? Well, it mostly is, apart from one little footnote, and that's the fact that some people think that Halloween is kind of an unofficial sort of sequel to a film called Black Christmas. So what do Black Christmas and Halloween have in common? What's the connection? Well, both of the films were released in the 70s, Black Christmas in 1974 and Halloween in 1978. And both of them are often cited for helping to kickstart the American slasher movie movement that pretty much dominated the 80s. Add on to this the fact that some people feel that the origins of John Carpenter's film can perhaps be traced back to a conversation he once had with Bob Clark about Black Christmas. The following is taken from an interview with Bob Clark and is about a discussion he had with John Carpenter. I never intended to do a sequel to Black Christmas. I did a film about 3 years later, a film with John Carpenter. It was his first film for Warner Bros. He asked me if I was ever going to do a sequel and I said no. I was through with horror. I didn't come into the business to do just horror. He said, well, what would you do if you did a sequel? I said it would have been the next year and the guy would have actually been caught. He'd escape from a mental institution, go back to the house and they'd start all over again. And I would call it Halloween. Okay, so that is for all intents and purposes basically the plot of the actual film Halloween, right? So this conversation does very much make Halloween look like a unofficial Black Christmas sequel, which went on to have its connection to Black Christmas forgotten about and stripped away. Yet when you look into the history of Halloween a little more deeply, you'll learn that the producers, Irwin Yablans and Mustafa Akid, approached Carpenter to direct a movie about a killer stalking babysitters. Carpenter and Deborah Hill agreed and began working on a script titled The Babysitter Murders. It was reportedly Yablans who then suggested the movie be retitled Halloween, and that the story take place on Halloween night. So in total honesty, other people might disagree, but I don't think Halloween is a sequel to Black Christmas in any way, shape or form. But I do think that Carpenter had clearly enjoyed Black Christmas and had taken something away from his viewing of it, something which lured in the back of his mind in certain ways and came out during the making of Halloween. But this is a common thing people do. It's one of the reasons why, whenever I've wrote stories, I'll try to limit how much I read. because your mind will sometimes look for elements of things and steal them without you even really realising it. The film Halloween itself is an absolute classic, and the character it introduces, Michael Myers, basically went on to be a modern horror icon. Yes, everybody knows things like that his face is a William Shatner Star Trek mask painted white. But the character is this, like, unstoppable mystery boogeyman. And a lot of the start of the story is built up of him basically just stalking and watching. It's only later on that he actually starts to murder people. If you're watching the film nowadays, compared to some later films, the pace would seem a little bit slow, and arguably the death count isn't the highest. But I think what you have here is a really well laid out film which features some brilliant acting from not only a young Jamie Lee Curtis, but also an actor who I absolutely love, and that is Donald Pleasence, who is Dr. Sam Loomis, who, well, basically he was Michael, otherwise known as the Shape's doctor, and he's trying to catch him. The film also has, quite simply, the most amazing soundtrack. When they wrote the music for this film, they really hit onto something, and every time it's used in every one of this film's sequels, it ties them together. To me, this is like the horror equivalent of the John Williams Star Wars soundtrack. In the highly unlikely event you haven't actually seen the original Halloween, even though I probably have spoiled quite a bit in this review, basic outline wise, I don't want to go on to spoil anymore because it really is an all-time classic great which you should go back and watch. And if you do find it slightly slow at the start, just bear with it. The payoffs in the film are ultimately worth any waiting that you have to do. Okay, that's Kerr9000 signing off, hoping that you'll join me next time for my next horror review. Keep on watching those scary movies, boys and girls. Laters, gators. Hi, and thanks for checking out my video and making it to the end. If you'd like to subscribe, there's a little thing down there. Yep, there. And you should also see some links to some other videos on the screen now. I make reviews of horror films, video games, sci-fi films, and all sorts of stuff. Or you can catch me on J Arcade. Okay, take care. Have a great day. Bye.